Syima, welcome to this special interview for the RSA Journal.
And thank you for having me on.
For those that don't know, and most will, Syima is founder and artistic director of the Bradford Literature Festival. So I'm sure we'll be discussing that quite a bit, Syima, over the next 30 or 40 minutes or so. Before we get to that, I'd love to hear a bit more about your background prior to that. So what drew you to Bradford? What drew you to arts and culture and literature?
I think a moment of insanity on both accounts. I think in terms of arts and culture, it's been a personal interest for a really long time. I was really lucky that I was brought up with books. So I've always been hugely interested in reading and books, and mainly fairy tales and fantasy. I'm all about the escapism. But I was literally brought up with that. I think maybe partially also because I'm an only child. So the books were my companions a lot of the time. But I think if I look back, the thing that probably really cemented my interest in terms of arts and culture and how that led to the Bradford Literature Festival was that so I'm second generation migrant to this country. My parents were first generation. And as anybody knows, anybody who knows anything about people migrating into a country, most people have this myth of return that they're always going to go back home. And my father was actually a little bit of a standing joke amongst his friends because his catchphrase was, well, there's no need to do X, Y, or Z because we're going to go back home. And the way that translated for me was that actually I spent the early years of my life going back home. Literally, my mother, when she was pregnant, went to Pakistan, and I was born in Pakistan because her family were there. And I came back to the UK when I was 4 months, went back when I was a year and a half. I came back when I was 2.5. I went to nursery, went back to Pakistan, and I was, and that was meant to be for good. We went when I was 5 years old, and then at 8 years old, lo and behold, we were back in the UK. But when I was in Pakistan, near where my father lives, because I used to go to school in a different area, every time I went home, there was a bookshop, and I would go there and buy these at the time 1 rupee fairy tales. And one of my abiding all my life sort of conversations with my mother had been the fact that I had this big collection. She left them behind when we moved to the UK. But when I came to the UK, I'd lost all my English. I went to a language centre, and I was there for 2 terms. I went to junior school at what would now be the end of year 4. And this probably illustrates where my English was, that because I got 98% at the end of year test in my maths and 34% in my English vocabulary. And the next year, my marks were 99%. And that is literally down to the fact that my mother took me to the library religiously every Saturday because she was determined I was going to make it. She was then told when we came back to the country, it doesn't matter where you live, just live in one place so she can actually get a consistent education. And we had family friends, and they said to her, right, she needs to pass the 11 plus because I grew up in Halifax, which still has grant-maintained schools and had the grammar school system at the time. And she was told, okay, what needs to happen now? She needs to go to the grammar school. So my mother very single-mindedly was then determined that this was going to happen. The friend that I grew up with, you are going to pass your 11 plus or else. I have no idea what else was, but for her that translated into taking me to the library. And I think that has really influenced, I loved it, but I used to I got to the point where I used to have to hide to read my books because my mum would be like, why aren't you reading your textbooks? Because once I get into a book, I get into a book. But I think that really influenced me in terms of setting up the Literature Festival, because I think I was really lucky I had that push. I had somebody who understood the importance of reading, and I have a very simplistic belief that education has the power to change lives, and that literacy is the absolute foundation stone of that. And that has been a very, very long answer to your very short question.
No, it's a great story, though. It's a great story. I think you've already started to answer my second question, really, which was on the Bradford Literature Festival. Where did the idea come from, and how did you make the idea a reality?
So the idea came because I think obviously I've said about my love of reading and how that influenced my education. My first job was actually in inward investment and regeneration in London. And that was really interesting from a point of view of what makes an area attractive for companies to invest in, but also how you retain companies. And my career, I hopped around a little bit, but I also have a background in data-led marketing strategies. But the last piece of work that I did before I set up the festival was actually looking at the sort of long-term strategies for the further education college in Bradford. And the thing that I was really struck by was, and Bradford, as some of you may know, is, and Andy, you will know this, youngest city in Europe, growing population. I think there's only 2 places in the country that have a growing population in this kind of way, but also has had the problems that it's had in terms of the race riots going back quite a long time now. And I think when I did that piece of work, having for my sins run a small business in Bradford, and I'd never run a small business before, having had this sort of corporate background, so I'd had a baptism of fire from that point of view. But it had actually meant that I had got to know the city in a way that I might not otherwise have experienced. But having done that work, having seen where Bradford was from a regeneration point of view, but also doing the work in the education sector, which made me realise that a lot of that population growth is coming from certain areas, and most of those areas have schools that are not doing terribly well. And I was looking at the jobs of the future that had been predicted by the West Yorkshire Economic Partnership, and I think I was just really struck by the fact that actually these kids were never going to get those jobs. They were never going to have the educational attainment, which meant they would go into those jobs. And I felt, these are the things that mean that you end up with race riots and communities, not working together because certain communities are seen as problematic. So, lots of different things went into it, but I think also because Bradford is a really diverse city. And like I said, I grew up in Halifax, which is like a microcosm of Bradford. And I felt that actually if you talked about the issues that you could see when you stood in Bradford because of the number of communities in the city, we have over 150 languages spoken. And if you looked at the heritage of Bradford with all the successive migrations from Jewish German to the Eastern European, you could perhaps create something that would change narratives, bring people together. But the key driver for me was around children and young people. I'm really, really passionate about that. Well, I talked about the fact that I went to the grammar school, which still exists across the Heath. And I think the thing that's really stayed with me from that school was Asian parents have a real thing about maths. And I did really badly in my maths in my second year. And my mum, when she went to my parents' evening, and my mum doesn't speak English, so she would sort of go with the aid of a translator. She said to my maths teacher, does she need a tutor? And he said, no, it's fine. I'll give her some extra lessons. And he said to me, lovely gentleman, Mr. Hobley, and it's stayed with me all my life. He said to me, if you weren't intelligent, you wouldn't be here. If you don't understand, it's because we're not teaching you in the right way. And I really look back at that and I think how many children fall between the cracks because they're told they're not intelligent. And, and I saw this recently with my daughter who has ADD and dyscalculia, which is dyslexia for maths. And I was saying to one of my friends, I really experienced firsthand how somebody who's actually really intelligent, is, now at a really good university, et cetera, could have very easily fallen between the cracks. So again, a long-winded answer to the fact that actually, so the Bradford Literature Festival was, I suppose, set up as a social intervention. It is about arts and culture. I love arts and culture, but the key drivers, it's a cross-arts festival, really. But it is a literature festival because literacy is really, really important. And I felt that actually what children and people needed to see was that they could go to a literature festival and be included. Because I think the other side of it was that the other literature festivals I was going to had a very particular audience. And while they are great and they're important and I love them, the people in those rooms are actually already engaged. And the people who need to be hearing those conversations aren't there. And the children, young people there again, they have books, they're growing up with books, their parents are engaged, they're taking them to these events. And the children who actually need to be turned on to these things, that provision isn't there for them.
And tell me about the BLS journey then. So the first one, 2014, I think.
Yes.
tell me a bit about that, and then tell me a bit about where you are now, 2023, and how you've grown and how you've developed the festival over that 9-year window.
So 2014 was 2 days, 25 events. It was a complete, I'm not, I said, I'm not from the arts and culture world. I had no idea about festivals or creating festivals. I literally had this moment where I was like, oh, I know what we should do. I know what we should do in Bradford. We should have a literature festival because it will attract all these people and be great for the regeneration and inspire young people. So the 2014 was a marker in the ground. It was 2 days, 25 events. We had about 900 attendees who came to various things. And now in 2023, we are one of the largest festivals in the country. We just ran 678 events. We had 116,000 attendees. And it's been a really interesting, eye-opening journey for me. We're what's called the largest diverse-led cultural organisation in the north of England. So I think for me, coming into this sector and seeing the conversations and how they are framed has been a really interesting process. The festival, to my mind, is just common sense. So all the things that it does were done from a common sense point of view. So it has an education program because that's the way to engage young people who aren't part of who wouldn't normally be brought to a literature festival. It has an ethical ticketing policy because that's how you bring in people who are socioeconomically diverse. And for me, that's actually the most important thing. But yes, it's been an eye-opening journey. So 2015 was the first festival proper, 10 days, 135 events. And, over those 9 years, we've had over 550,000 audiences from over 30 countries. Our audience diversity averages at 54%. Our artistic diversity averages at about 44%. So we've had artists with roots in more than 72 countries, over 210,000 children, young people. So it's been really interesting. And I know that from the conversations that I've had, we've been seen as quite I suppose it's an innovative disruptor in the culture sector. But like I said, to me, most of the things that we do are just purely common sense.
Well, I can certainly, having been and spoken at the last couple, Syima, I absolutely attest to the vibrancy and the energy and the diversity of the festival, which is quite unlike anything I've been to, and a huge testimony, I think, to what you've been able to achieve over those 9 years. Can you say a bit more about, I think this is one of the distinctive features for me, it is your focus on younger people and your education program. Can you say a bit more about that? And who are the kids coming and what are they getting from coming on to your festival?
So the education program is actually one of the festival programs that runs. So we don't have we do work with schools year round, but the education program runs during the festival itself. And the reason for that is that it means that children get to hear from speakers from around the world, and the program is an integral part of the festival. So it speaks to the same kinds of themes that the main festival is speaking to. In terms of the children who come, so we engage with schools from across West Yorkshire, of course Bradford. So far we've engaged with about 80% of the primary and secondary schools in Bradford, but we also get schools from Kirklees, Leeds, Haldane, South Yorkshire, and London as well, and a lot of home educators. As I said, I mean, the idea for the education program came from the fact that we run a stream of events during the festival, which are free again, and they run at the weekends to enable parents to sort of naturally fall into the festival is the idea. But what I was really struck by was that, again, unless you're really switched on to these things as a parent, you're probably not going to know about the fact that there's a literature festival taking place. And for most people who we want to get to come to these things, a literature festival would not be a natural thing to go to. It wouldn't be something that they would see as being for them. So the education program came from that. It was again an intervention, if you like. It was how do we get the children, young people who wouldn't normally engage with these things? How do we make them aware of the festival? And actually, how do we inspire them? And I think the key thing for that is, in terms of that program, is raising aspirations, raising literacy levels, and the aspirations part comes very much from the main program. So having people like yourself at the festival, and actually that being open to young people to come along to. But for example, this year it was the 60-year anniversary of the I Have a Dream speech, and the person that we had speaking to young people was Keith Ellison, who is the Attorney General of Minnesota, the Chief Prosecutor for the George Floyd case. And I think these things make a massive difference.
They absolutely do make a massive difference. And maybe just on that theme of making a massive difference, Syima, could you say a few words about what contribution the festival, and indeed what contribution culture generally plays in the regeneration of a city like Bradford, which as someone who grew up just sort of 10 miles north of Bradford, I've seen struggle through much of my life. So tell me a bit about how the culture and the festival can help in that big regeneration effort, which is absolutely underway in Bradford now.
Absolutely. I think the festival has been, it's been a key part of Bradford moving forward, probably in ways that I certainly didn't envisage when I first set it up, because I think at that point you have an idea of what you want to achieve. So over the last 9 years, I have seen the tremendous shifts in the sector itself, and I think because BLF has been and is very ambitious, that actually helped promote ambition in the culture sector in Bradford. Where traditionally there had been a little bit of oh, that's not for us, or we wouldn't be able to achieve X, Y, or Z. So I think the festival has been really instrumental from that point of view. I think, obviously with any cultural event, there are the economic impacts around, the footfall, like I said, we've had visitors from over 30 countries. That means hotel nights and people, spending in restaurants, and a change in terms of the image of the city. I think what's been really lovely for us was that when Bradford received the UK City of Culture accolade, BLF was independently cited by a number of different newspapers, but also awarding bodies, as being one of the key reasons for Bradford to receive the award. And I think BLF has been instrumental in showing what can be achieved in cities like Bradford. And I think the wider economic impact, I think there's two sides. Like I said, there is the hard economic impact in terms of what the football creates. And then I think with the kind of work that we do, where actually, the entire CYP program is free. So the education program that we provide for schools is free. The events for children and people in the festival are free. 60% of our, tickets during the festival, in terms of the ticketed program, went for free. I think that's actually about future economic impact, which is possibly not something that we can measure in that kind of hard way. But I think the feedback that we get from a qualitative point of view about the teachers who tell us, well, this young person would never have considered university, but now they're really interested. Children have come and quotes that you feel like you can't use because it's like, this has been the best day of my life, all of these various things. But I think that actually plants a seed that actually then grows. And without that kind of aspiration, without that kind of hope, we can't create that future economic impact. And then I think and I think given, where we are in the world today and the things that are happening, I think the impact of bringing people together, of bringing communities together who would normally never talk to each other or sit next to each other, and the fact that that happens naturally is really important. And then, we now talk about I think particularly post-COVID, the impact of loneliness and the health and well-being impacts of events like this. But I think the fact that this festival engages with people across all communities. It engages with people who wouldn't normally come into these spaces. It removes that threshold fear, as we call it, of stepping into certain spaces. Yeah, I think all of these things are sort of the future economic impact that we will see in coming years. And I would certainly count for BLF the City of Culture as part of that.
I think the point you raised there, Syima, about us having a sort of wide-angle lens, I suppose, on what we mean by regeneration. Because, of course, the BLF and in time, City of Culture will generate jobs and will generate income and will attract business and people. But the wider role in social connections of various types and in people with different backgrounds and beliefs, finding common cause through culture strikes me as, particularly at this moment, particularly important, not just in Bradford, but right across the world, actually.
Absolutely. And I think that is the interesting thing about Bradford, because of the communities that it has. The historical migration. So the festival has run a Jewish heritage strand for a really long time. I think one of the things about the festival that has been really important, and I, certainly over this last week, I've been reflecting about the things that we have programmed, the conversations that we've had, how some of those things have changed over the last 9 years. I think the really important thing is the fact that the conversations that BLF is able to have, because it is Bradford Literature Festival, because of the communities that are based here, because of the history that the city has, possibly can't happen anywhere else. And those are conversations that are actually really important from a worldwide point of view. And I found it interesting when I think one of the things that I actually find really interesting about BLF is the fact that there aren't more festivals like this. I think that's something I found quite interesting. Once you get beyond the sort of wide-eyed star, stars in your eyes, because you think, oh, it'd be great to set up this festival. It can do X, Y, and Z. But I think when I first came up with the idea, all of the things that we are now talking about in terms of bringing communities together and having conversations, inspiring young people, it was all really important. But I remember that the first day I started working on BLF full time was March 2014. And literally that was that day, the first UKIP councillor was elected in Keighley. And I find it interesting that the conversations that we have become increasingly more urgent rather than less, which is what I would have thought when we were setting the festival up, as time has progressed. And like I said, I don't see some of these conversations happening in other spaces. And it is really, really important that we have these conversations on a platform that is public and accessible to everyone.
I hear to all of that, Syima. Can I ask you about the future? You've seen tremendous success and growth over that first 9 years, and the 2023 festival really was fantastic. Getting you back after some difficult COVID years. I guess for anyone in arts and culture, those years were desperately difficult. But being fully back into the swing of things in 2023 with an amazing program of events and amazing numbers of people attending them. Tell me what lies in store, without giving away too many secrets, of course, for your 10th birthday next year. Indeed, the year after, the NF City of Culture in 2025 in Bradford, which will also be a really big event. So where are you looking in the future to watch further of the festival?
So yes, we are going to be 10 next year, which is really, it's hugely exciting. Also slightly, I think you have that moment where you think, where did the time go and how did this happen? So we have a theme of Now We Are 10 as a homage to Winnie the Pooh, who also has an anniversary next year, because our programming, I think, is best described as eclectic. I The festival has been really ambitious, and it's been ambitious from the start, because actually in a city like Bradford, it would be criminal not to be ambitious, and to not be, leading the way. I think we talk about the North-South divide, and we talk about the how London is this natural hub for culture, which of course is the capital city. But I think when you create things in places like Bradford, it creates a level of hope that and actually has an impact beyond say something. I'm saying beyond something that would be in London, but I personally I think the things that happen in London are actually really, really important, and London has its own diversity. But what my hopes for the festival are that we will become the key literature festival for the UK moving forward. I think it's really important because, like as I've said, this is the conversations that you can have in this city are I think pertinent in the from a worldwide perspective, and I think for me that's never been brought home more probably than in the last 2 weeks. Somebody once said to me that Bradford is a place where and they said to me, if you can solve Bradford, you can solve the UK. I don't know how completely true that is, but I certainly think that actually the challenges that a city like Bradford has, if you can actually bring people together to create a solution, that solution is actually easily replicated then in a variety of cities, and it creates a level of hope that maybe other places wouldn't. So I would like to spend the next 10 years, I hope, building on the tremendous acclaim that the festival has actually received internationally. We have really great international partnerships. I'd like to see those sort of being more on the ground in Bradford rather than out there internationally. There are some new program strands that we will be launching in 2024 rather. One of them is something that we've been working on for a little while called In Memory of Andalusia, which the original idea was to look back to the golden age of Andalusia as an era for particularly Muslim and Jewish cultural understanding, but also actually the three Abrahamic faiths that were represented in Andalusia. I think probably again never more pertinent than now. I'd wanted to launch it as part of our 10-year anniversary. So that's something that I think has sort of really moved up my list of priorities. But we will continue to build on the success that we've had, to root that further and grow. And actually, I hope to be able to keep having the conversations that are needed, and keep inspiring the people.
Fantastic. I'm going to come back to the future in a second. Before I do that, I want to go go back to a question about you, actually. I think it was a quote from a speech of yours in 2018, where you said that the BLF team, call you an insane geek. I think those are your words, Syima. So one, I want to know what you meant by that. And two, does it help explain the sort of richness and eclecticism that the festival embodies and has embodied under your leadership?
That is a quote of mine. I had a conversation with one of my team where they were talking about, and I can't quite remember what we were talking about, and I said, "Oh, that would make a brilliant event," and I think that is so interesting. And she said to me, "Syima, but you would find watching paint dry interesting, but you're such a geek." And I'm actually very proud of the fact that I'm a geek. I am a complete geek. I've always described my head as a butterfly head because I'm hugely interested in practically everything. But I think I don't see how you can build empathy otherwise. I think you have to be able to stand in lots of different spaces. Now, since then, what I did find out was that actually I am neurodiverse and ADD, and actually that fits in perfectly with having a butterfly head that's interested in everything. One of my friends actually said to me once, anybody that knows you really well knows that the festival is a mind map of your head. So yes, I don't think there's anything that we do in the festival that I'm not interested in. Possibly crime. I am not a crime person because I have an overactive imagination, and anything to do with crime and horror, I tend to leave well alone. And it's probably one of the reasons why that's one of the latter strands that we've developed, because that's one that I firmly leave to my team. But anything else, I'm always hugely interested in. And yes, I'm actually quite proud of being a geek. I think we need geeks in the world because, if we're all the same, it'd be very boring.
No, you're right. Geek chic these days, Syima. We're nearing the end, but a couple of last question from me, really, wrapped up in a statement. Because it's been fascinating listening to you speak, and two of the key themes that have come across for me, loud and clear, and both are super important right now. And the first is, culture as not just a vehicle for regeneration of a place, in this case, Bradford, indeed, wider West Yorkshire, in fact, but also culture as a bonding agent between communities and between ethnicities and between religions and between every dimension of diversity you can imagine, actually. And the festival absolutely embodies that culture as bonding agent. And the second, to use the word several times, is the hope that generates in a place, in raising aspirations and opportunities for younger people, and not just younger people, for less young people as well. Actually, what you've described, it is not just about becoming, you're already the most diverse literature festival, I imagine, in the world, and certainly in the UK.
Yes.
You have aspirations to be the biggest literature festival in the UK and one of the world, Syima. But actually, really what you're about, it strikes me, is just changing what it means to be a literature festival. You are changing the model. And this is a vehicle for social change and social opportunity and social regeneration. So actually, this is changing the model of literary festivals and what culture is all about, which I think is a huge project that puts your project really into perspective, even though you're still not even quite 10 years old. So that wasn't a question, it was kind of a statement, really. So I wonder if you agreed with it. Hope you did, because I'm summarizing your words, really. But also, if that's even roughly right, paint me a picture, not 1 year hence or 2 years hence, or even 10 years hence, maybe 20 or 25 years hence, of how the festival might be, how Bradford might be, and how the north of England might be, actually, when it came to its cultural offering. That's something very close to the heart of the RSA, was, we're doing work to try and develop the creative industries across the north of England. So using that vivid imagination of yours, Syima, and the insane geek in you, paint me a picture, tell me a story of how things could be.
Well, firstly, I would really agree with everything that you said in terms of summarising the festival. I think one of the things that we tend to shy away from in the arts and culture space is the politics that surround us. But we are actually completely impacted by all of those politics. I think my hope would be, and certainly when I set the festival up, one of the things that I said was this can't be a flash in the pan, because actually to create change, it has to be long-term and sustained. So my hope would be that if, when we get to our 25-year or 30-year anniversary, I would hope that the North has connectivity, that our country, which is so tiny compared to so many others, would have opened up its economic capacity in the North by creating better linkages, not just across the North, but between the North and the South. Because actually, when you look at cities like Bradford, with their with that young population. It is a tremendous economic powerhouse for the future. I would hope that these conversations that we are now having, about the need to understand each other. I hope we will have a better understanding of each other across communities. I think one of the things that we've always talked about with the festival is the common threads that actually bind us together. And words are really key as part of that. And I think the more in common since Joe Cox, who's actually my MP, has become a phrase, but the original name for the festival was the Common Word Festival, which came both from a point of view of socioeconomics, but also because there's a line in the Quran, which is let us come to a common word between us, which is obviously addressed at the Abrahamic faiths, which I've always thought was really inspiring and really important. So my hope would be that actually the North has stopped being the poor cousin of the South, that we have those connectivities, and that we actually understand that to be to retain and actually strengthen and develop our economic position in the world, we actually need a connected country rather than a divided country. That young people in the North and young people actually from poorer socioeconomic backgrounds deserve the same chances, because that actually unlocks the potential for the country. And actually that arts and culture is something that is really important. It is the glue that binds people together. We all live within, we talk about communities, and one of the things that I found really interesting about being in this space is that when we talk about communities, we are not talking about communities per se. We are talking about very particular groups of people, and the word community is used to describe those groups of people, rather than the fact that actually we're all part of communities, and lots of different ones. I think some of that stigma needs to, certainly in this space, needs to go from the word community, where there is almost this, communities are the people that we reach out to and we tick a box, and it's fine to hold certain things together with sellotape while we actually focus on other things in a different way. And I think there needs to be a sort of a democracy of access and opportunity right across that space.
Wonderful. That's a brilliant way to end, Syima. And the expression you just used there, which lets us have a common word between us, such a poignant and telling one, just at the moment, actually always. So thank you for sharing that. And I've hugely enjoyed us having a common word between us over the course of the last 40 minutes. Thank you hugely for your time. As ever, listening to you, I've been even more inspired by what you're trying to achieve through the festival and in Bradford more generally, which has already had a huge impact. I think has potential to have an even bigger impact in future. So thank you, Syima. Keep up the fantastic work. We're looking to you to make that change and to establish that common word, not just in Bradford, but more broadly.
Andy, thank you so much for having me as part of your podcast and as part of the RSA's podcast. It's been an absolute pleasure, and I hope we can continue to keep having that conversation.